For 7 years I was everything to my parents. A nurse, a financial guardian, a psychologist. Then my brother came back from nowhere and they asked me to move out. Now they are calling because he stole everything and disappeared again. I'm used to putting my life on hold. Since I was 18, that's just what I've done. It started when my older brother, Zach, vanished without any real explanation. One day he was just gone. No conversation, no warning, no goodbye. Just a note left behind on his bed, folded crookedly, the handwriting barely legible. I need space. That was it. Nothing else. I had just finished high school, and I still remember the way the world felt like it had stopped spinning when I read those 3 words. Our parents were devastated. Not in the loud, dramatic way you see in movies, but in a quiet, slow kind of decay that seeps into every part of a house until even the silence feels different. I was supposed to be figuring out where I go to college, dreaming about dorm rooms and majors and who I wanted to become, but instead I stayed. I stayed because someone had to. I took on the grocery runs, the late-night drives to the pharmacy, the quiet presence in the house when my mom couldn't get out of bed and my dad just stared out the living room window as if Zach might walk back up the driveway any second. I told myself it was temporary. That I'd take a year off and then apply somewhere, anywhere once the dust settled. But the dust never did. It just rearranged itself. My parents fell apart in slow motion. It wasn't a dramatic crash but more like watching a building slowly crumble from the inside, one silent crack at a time. After Zach left, the emptiness he left behind seemed to settle into the walls of our house, and no one knew how to fill it. My father started getting sick. Nothing immediately life-threatening but frequent, mysterious illnesses that seemed to eat away at him bit by bit. He was always tired, always achy, always at some appointment or coming back from one with more pills and fewer answers. My mother, once the loud, determined type who kept the house running like a tight ship, began unraveling emotionally. She stopped doing the little things first, like making her morning coffee or watering the plants, and then the bigger things followed. She barely spoke. She didn't cook anymore. Most days, she just sat at the kitchen table staring blankly at whatever book she wasn't really reading. And so, someone had to take care of everything. That someone became me. It wasn't a decision I made so much as a role that quietly formed around me until it became impossible to separate who I was from what I was doing. College, once the thing I'd dreamt about for years, had to be postponed. There was no way I could leave, not with things the way they were. The bills didn't pay themselves and the fridge didn't fill on its own. My dad needed someone to drive him to doctor appointments and my mom, well, she needed someone to remember to do things like pick up groceries or pay the power bill, because she simply wasn't there anymore, not in the way she used to be. I picked up a job at a grocery store to help cover expenses, and suddenly my days were split between shifts, caretaking, and figuring out how to keep our world from falling completely apart. I was only 19 but it felt like I'd aged 10 years in 6 months. For 7 years, my life became a relentless cycle of exhaustion and quiet resentment, spinning between 3 part-time jobs that barely paid the bills, night classes I could hardly stay awake for, endless doctor's appointments for my father, and a to-do list that never seemed to shrink no matter how much I crossed off. There were days when I didn't know what year it was anymore, just that I had to be up at 6, that mom would forget to take her medication if I didn't remind her, and that the rent was due on the 15th no matter what else was happening. Through all of it, Zach never called. Not once. He didn't send a letter. He didn't text. He didn't even send me a half-hearted birthday message in all that time, as if I'd vanished from his world just as completely as he had vanished from ours. And their room, Zach's room, remained untouched, preserved like some sacred shrine, a museum exhibit to a person who had chosen to leave us behind. My mother refused to let me clean it. His sheets stayed folded the same way, the posters on his walls slowly fading in the sunlight that crept through the closed blinds. It was like a temple to a forgotten hero, someone whose absence was more powerful than his presence had ever been, and walking past it every day felt like passing a locked door in my own mind that I wasn't allowed to open. On Christmas Day, everything changed, though the unraveling began 3 days earlier when I was midway through my shift, scanning barcodes with a kind of practiced numbness, when my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another overdue bill reminder or one of the pharmacy alerts for my dad's medications, but something in me checked anyway. It was my mother, and her voice on the other end was trembling in a way I hadn't heard in years, the kind of tremble that made my stomach tighten before she even said the words. "Zach is coming back, for dinner," she whispered as if saying it too loudly would scare the moment away. I froze there, one hand still on a customer's grocery item, heart slamming against my ribs while the world around me kept moving, oblivious. After 7 years, 7 Christmases spent pretending he didn't exist, 7 birthdays of blowing out candles without him, 7 winters of walking past that untouched room, he was just suddenly coming back, like some prodigal ghost who decided to show up as if nothing had happened. No apology. No explanation. Just an invitation to dinner, like the past decade hadn't been quietly destroying the rest of us while he disappeared into wherever he went. Suddenly the house was in a state of flux, like someone had shaken a snow globe that had been still for years, and now everything inside it was shifting too fast to make sense of. My mother, who could barely be bothered to brush her hair most days, was suddenly up at dawn scrubbing baseboards and vacuuming with a manic energy I hadn't seen in over a decade. She rearranged furniture that hadn't moved in years, bleached the bathroom tiles until they looked new, and even baked the kind of cinnamon cookies she used to make when we were kids, the ones she hadn't touched since Zach left. My father, who had spent the last few winters wrapped in heavy blankets and silence, drove across town just to pick up Zach's favorite whiskey, a bottle that sat gleaming on the counter like some sacred relic. They were shining in a way that felt unnatural, like they were being lit from within by a sun that had never warmed me. And as I watched them move through the house with hope stitched into their every step, I felt something cold and sharp squeezing me from the inside, something I didn't have a name for but knew too well. It was like all those years of sacrifice and silence were collapsing inward, and in their place was this tight, icy knot that no one else seemed to notice, not while they were too busy preparing for the return of someone who had never once looked back. Zach showed up on Christmas Day like some long-lost prince returning to claim a kingdom he'd abandoned, dressed better than any of us in a sleek coat and polished shoes, with that effortless movie star smile I hadn't seen in years but still remembered with a strange ache. He stood in the doorway like it hadn't been 7 years of silence, like we weren't strangers now, and with his arms open wide he announced, as casually as someone talking about staying for dessert, that he was coming back forever. My mom burst into tears right there, her hands trembling over the dish towel she'd been clenching, while my dad let out a laugh, an actual laugh, like he'd just won some cosmic lottery. It was surreal, watching their faces light up like someone had turned back time, like the last 7 years of grief and sickness and loneliness had never happened. And then, almost immediately before we'd even sat down to eat, my mom looked at me with that same watery-eyed joy and said, "Mel, maybe it's time for you to move out. Zach will take care of everything now." Just like that. As if the weight I'd carried every single day since he left was suddenly optional, as if I could be dismissed like an old coat now that the favorite child had returned. I didn't even have time to react before my dad chimed in with a hopeful nod, and I sat there stunned, something breaking quietly inside me while they all moved on like I'd never been the one holding everything together. I stood in the hallway wringing my fingers until the knuckles turned white, the echo of their words still ringing in my ears like a bell that refused to stop tolling. My life, everything I had sacrificed, everything I had built around their needs, had just been erased in one careless sentence. There was no thank you. No acknowledgement of the years I spent making sure they were fed, clothed, cared for, alive. They didn't look me in the eye, didn't ask if I was okay, didn't even pretend to make it a conversation. They didn't say, "Do you agree?" or "How do you feel about this?" They just said, "It's time for you to go," like I was a placeholder finally being relieved of duty now that the rightful heir had returned. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't part of their future. I had been a bridge, nothing more, a temporary solution to a permanent absence, and now that Zach was back, I had served my purpose. Uncle Henry caught up with me on the stairs as I was trying to disappear before anyone noticed the way my hands were shaking. He had always been the quiet one at family gatherings, the man who lingered on the edges with a thoughtful look and a full plate, rarely speaking unless spoken to. But this time he stopped me with a firm hand on my shoulder and looked me straight in the eye, his voice steady and low, but filled with something that almost sounded like anger. "It's not fair," he said, and the words hit harder than I expected, maybe because no one else had bothered to say them. "I know you've been keeping this family afloat," he continued, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt seen. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a simple white business card, holding it out like it was a lifeline. He told me he needed an assistant at work, someone reliable, organized, and tough. And then he said, without hesitation, that I was the right person. Not because I was convenient, not because I was desperate, but because I had proven myself without even trying to. I stood there on the stairs, stunned, clutching that little card like it was the first real offer of escape I'd ever received. I didn't return that night. I couldn't. The thought of walking back into that house, into that absurd theater of joy where I had suddenly become invisible, made my chest feel like it was caving in. So instead, I drove aimlessly for a while, the kind of driving where the roads blur together and you're not even sure where you're heading, only that you can't go back. I ended up in the parking lot of a Walmart just off the highway, parked beneath one of those flickering overhead lights that made everything look colder than it already was. I curled up in the driver's seat with my coat pulled over me and stayed there all night, staring out the windshield as families came and went, watching the world move on around me like I didn't exist. The next morning I went back not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see if it was really as bad as I thought. And it was. Zach was in the living room, rearranging furniture like he owned the place, his voice loud and carefree as he barked out orders and made snide little jokes, tossing things aside that I had carefully placed over the years. My mom was in the kitchen humming to herself, happily washing dishes like the last 7 years had been some long dream she was finally waking up from. Neither of them looked at me as I stood in the doorway, still wearing the same clothes from the night before. And in that moment I knew. I walked to my room, pulled out the duffel bag I kept under my bed and packed my things in silence. No one asked where I was going. No one tried to stop me. My uncle appeared on the doorstep again, just as I was zipping up the last section of my duffel bag. He didn't say anything at first, just held out a paper cup of coffee, still warm, with that familiar bitter scent that somehow made me feel like the world hadn't completely come undone. I took it with shaking hands, unable to meet his eyes, but he didn't seem to need me to say anything. He had this quiet steadiness about him, like he knew exactly what I was feeling without needing to hear it. After a few moments of silence, he spoke, calm, direct, no pity in his voice. For the second time he offered me the chance to stay with him, to leave all of this behind and try something different, something that belonged only to me. He told me the offer at the logistics company was still on the table, that he believed in my work ethic, that I didn't owe anyone an explanation for wanting to start over. And this time I didn't hesitate. I nodded, more grateful than I could ever say, and for the first time in years, I felt the tiniest flicker of something that almost resembled hope. New days began in quiet, unfamiliar ways. The house I moved into with Uncle Henry wasn't large or flashy, but it was clean and still, and most importantly, it was mine to inhabit without feeling like I had to earn every breath I took. There were no footsteps outside my door at all hours, no one calling my name every 5 minutes, no one asking what was for dinner or why the laundry hadn't been folded. For the first time in years I could just breathe, deep, full breaths that didn't come with guilt or the weight of expectation pressing on my chest. The silence wasn't empty, it was peaceful, and in it, I began to find pieces of myself that I didn't even realize I had lost. I started waking up early not because someone needed me to, but because I wanted to. I went for walks, read in the evenings, and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea just because I could. And for the first time in a very long time, I gave myself permission to look forward. I enrolled in an online course in supply chain management, something I never thought I'd be able to do, and each time I logged in, it felt like I was reclaiming a future that had once seemed out of reach. 2 months passed in a kind of gentle blur, the days folding into one another with a calm I hadn't known in years. I kept studying, I learned how to navigate spreadsheets and shipping systems. I even started helping around the office at Uncle Henry's company. My phone stayed silent, and for a while I was glad. My parents didn't call, didn't text, didn't ask where I'd gone or how I was doing, and though a part of me ached with the quiet, the larger part of me understood that this silence was its own kind of closure. Then out of nowhere the silence cracked. The first message came late one evening, my mom's voice through a voicemail, hesitant and strained, saying, "Hi, can you call me? It's important." I stared at the screen for a long time but didn't respond. I didn't want to open that door again, not after everything. I thought maybe it would stop there, but on Friday my phone rang again, this time from an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer, and it was my dad on the other end, his voice low and shaky. "Zach disappeared again," he said. "But this time he took everything. The money, the car, even your mom's wedding ring." There was a long silence after that, as if he expected me to say something, to jump in and help the way I always used to. But I couldn't speak. I just sat there holding the phone to my ear, feeling nothing and everything all at once. They asked for help, not just a few dollars to get by, but real help, the kind that meant stepping back into the chaos, picking up the shattered pieces, and gluing them together like I had all those years before. They needed someone to take control of everything again, to manage the bills, talk to the bank, figure out what to do with what Zach had left behind. My mother cried softly on the line, my father's voice cracked in a way I'd never heard before, and for a brief moment, I felt that familiar pull, the instinct to fix everything, to be the one who held it all together. I listened patiently, quietly, my chest tight and my throat dry. I told them I would think about it, and I meant it, but as I hung up the phone, something deep inside me stood firm. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even bitterness anymore. It was just the quiet truth that I couldn't unlearn what I'd lived through. I couldn't forget the years I gave up, the way they pushed me aside the second Zach returned, the silence that followed when I left. And no matter how much guilt clawed at me, something in me didn't allow me to just go back to the way things were. Not this time. Not after everything. Now I am at a crossroads, standing between the version of me that once said yes without thinking and the one who finally learned how to say no. I can help them, I know that. I know how to make spreadsheets sing and budgets breathe. I know how to juggle doctor appointments and overdue bills. I know how to carry a crumbling family on my back because I've done it before. But the question that lingers like smoke in the air is whether I should. Whether I have to give myself completely, again, to people who only remembered my worth when everything else fell apart. People who, for years, let me fade into the background while they lit candles at the altar of someone who walked away without a second thought. I don't have an answer yet. I don't know what choice I'll make, and maybe I won't until the moment comes. But I do know one thing for certain. I am no longer the girl who sat quietly in the back seat of someone else's life, gripping the handle and hoping to be noticed. I have taken the wheel now, and wherever I'm headed, it's going to be on my own terms.